We are live from Sales HQ. I'm Vince Beasy, your host and the founder at Sales HQ, and our guest today is Ron Nelson. Ron, thanks for joining us today.
Yeah, thanks for having me. This is awesome.
What is Sales HQ? So Sales HQ is its first of a kind co-selling community specifically for high-performing sellers and sales teams. Our first location is in the Raleigh-Durham area, but things go well, we'll expand outside of it. So what is co-selling? Co-selling means that you sit next to others that are in the sales profession, you learn from them, you collaborate with them, you network with them, you feed off their energy. So we are a community, we're creating an environment, right? That's high sales, high energy here. So we offer flex space with offices, desks, and conference rooms. So if you don't want to be a member, you can still come in here and hold meetings or conferences and events and so on and so forth. For more information about Sales HQ, go to saleshq.co to learn more about us. With that, Ron, love to learn a little bit more about yourself.
Yeah.
What you're up to these days, get a little bit into your background before we jump into some topics you wanted to cover today.
Yeah, for sure. It's going to be hard to beat that sales pitch that you got of Sales HQ.
I don't call that pitch. That's just enthusiasm for the concept of Sales
I love
HQ.
it. And to be fair, I love the concept as well, and love being around other people here and seeing what they're doing and being able to hear how they're selling and
beats the alternative of being by yourself, doesn't
correct.
it?
That is true. Well, I have my dog at home, so there's that too. But yeah, just a little bit about me. Ron Nelson. I started RN Consulting last year, so it's been a little over a year now. And the main drive for starting that was to help founders get past their founder-led sales stage, or in some cases get into it. Background before that and what kind of led me to that is I started with iContact here locally in the Raleigh-Durham area, helped build out their small business sales team, kind of took that from external to an internal team and built that up to 16 or so people. That's where I really got into the sales leadership aspect of it, and how to grow teams efficiently and, with what's needed from the business standpoint.
Yep.
After that, wanted to get in on the ground floor, went over to AdZerk, which is now Kavel, as the first salesperson and grew that team. I think it was close to 20 people by the time I left a few years ago, doing really well. And I wanted to get in on the ground floor again, went over to Localize, and based in New York. I really wanted to help them build their initial enterprise sales structure. And that's exactly what we did. In a short period of time, we nearly doubled revenue. And it was all based on playbooks that I had learned over the years from AdZerk, iContact, and other companies that I was working with at the time. Realized that those playbooks were doing a really good job with Localize, and wanted to help as many founders as I could get to and beyond that stage. And that's how RN Consulting was born.
Yeah, and founders tend to be two groups, right? They have a sales background, a sales career, or they don't.
Yep.
Those that don't just rely on passion. But before we get into that topic, what I think is a great topic, one I'm passionate about as well, as you know, I find that most sales leaders and salespeople don't go to school for sales. They don't dream of being in sales. It's something else. What was your catalyst to getting into sales?
So it's funny. I definitely fell into sales. There was no like, I am going to school and I'm going to be a salesperson. There was none of that. I went to school for marketing and management at UMass Lowell, up in the Boston area. My first job out of school was for the International Masonry Institute, which was the marketing agency, or is the marketing agency for the Bricklayers Union.
Oh, wow.
So
early traditional business there.
Very traditional business, right? So a big part of that job was to get in front of architects and owners of these upcoming projects and to get them to use masonry products. And so I was sitting there writing up a bunch of collateral emails and all this stuff. And I'm like, why don't we just go get in front of them?
Yeah.
Right. So that marketing coordinator role turned more into, it kind of equated to like a pharmaceutical sale, where you're there telling people about the benefits. And
You're on construction sites, I assume.
not on construction sites, actually go more so like the owners of the projects, like
Okay.
the developers, the land developers, and then the architects. And having conversations with them and telling them about masonry products and all the different benefits, which I could probably not list off now anymore. But we were able to, get in front of them and have good conversations. But the part that I didn't love was I wasn't there for the final sale. Like you couldn't celebrate it. And I realized that part of it was so awesome.
The best part of it.
The best part
Yeah.
of it, right? And not being there sucked. So I wanted to.
Couldn't ring the bell.
Couldn't ring the bell. You couldn't do anything, right? You couldn't high five your teammates. It was just like, all right, well, hey, we found out like 2 years later that they are using masonry products in their project. So I wanted to get more on the front lines. And at that time, my wife and I were moving down to the Raleigh area, and I got into tech. He was looking for a job, got into eye contact, and kind of the rest is history from there. And I naturally, wanted to navigate my way into sales, and it kind of turned into sales leadership. So definitely not well versed or like trained in it, but I've learned from all the scars and lumps that I've gotten over the years.
You learned the hard way, right?
Yeah.
So when you were in the marketing role at the first company out of college, what was it that you kind of helped you as you did eventually advance your career into sales as a seller and then as a sales leader? What kind of did you take away from that really resonated with you that you continue to use today? Was there anything that kind of stuck with you?
Yeah, I think the big thing is doing whatever it takes, right? Like I was the marketing coordinator, which I kind of look back at. It's funny because a big part of my job was a lot of the digital components and putting together emails and HTML coding of the emails and things like that.
You had to wear a bunch of different hats, right?
Yeah, I had to figure out what needed to be done in order to make a sale. Even though that was a long-term sale, but I had to figure it out. And it could have been copywriting. It could have been like writing the actual email itself.
Yeah.
It could have been doing the actual design, touching up some photos of recent projects that were completed that had masonry in it. It was just doing whatever it took to get the job done and just being available to provide that information at a drop of a hat.
Translates well for startups then, right?
Yeah, exactly.
You probably got the eye contact and it seemed like a huge corporation, even though it was still a small business compared to where you came from. It's probably like, no, Ron, you're just going to do this one thing.
Yeah. Well, the good part about that is I was there when I was employee like number 80 or so. So it was still fairly early. There was still a lot of figuring out going on. It wasn't like I joined IBM, at the peak of its existence, and I was like doing one thing every single day. It was still kind of figuring things out and wearing multiple hats. But now, yes, in retrospect, absolutely, that was the biggest company I've worked at in the tech space. So clearly, you have a favorite in working for startups. You must enjoy. You have a passion for startups. When you've joined companies before you did your consulting, and you were at companies with early stage companies with tech founders, what is it that you figured out in the beginning that you really had to do to hone in on sales? Because these are probably typically founders that were doing the sales before you got there, either as a contributor or the sales leader. Yeah, that's a loaded question. I think like the big things. Are you asking like what they did?
Well,
or like what I did to like,
what did you kind of recognize was missing to be able for you to have success or your team to have success going from this founder led?
Yeah, I think the big thing that I've seen is like the structure in the sales process. A lot of founders, they're selling with passion, right? They're just selling, they're just having conversations. They're having as many conversations as they can, and they don't know how to suss out what a good lead is and what a bad lead is, right? So
they're all equal, right?
They're all equal because they're a conversation,
right?
Which, I definitely agree with. Having started my own company, like conversations are great, they're awesome, but you also have to realize, when to give up on some and when to continue to push when there's a need or a way you can help. So I think putting that structure in place allows founders to really figure out what they need to do in order to make a deal.
And I assume, again, I'm talking pre starting your consulting business that the startups you joined probably had maybe a loose kind of frame of the process and maybe CRM even at that point?
All of them had CRMs, yes, and there was very, very loose processes. But when I say processes, it was in the founder's head.
So I imagine when you joined, right, the pipeline was huge. It was great. So look at all the problem. You're going to walk in. I got all these opportunities for you. All you got to do is close them out for me. I'm like, the pipeline's not the problem here, right? And you get in and it's what?
Yeah. It's funny. Every company that I've been at, I tore the pipeline down.
Yeah.
The first thing I did was tear the pipeline down and just look at them holistically and realistically where they are.
Yeah.
And some of them are not deals, and that's okay. I think that's a big thing that founders need to realize, is that it's okay if your pipeline is small. Sometimes it's a good thing because you can focus on the ones that are there and put and do the activities that are required in order to sell them.
Yeah.
So
any shock when you go from, I'm making up a number, 50 opportunities down to 10? They're like, Ron, what are you doing? You're killing our deals.
Yeah. Also every single time. Because I mean, you're naturally, because a lot of the founders, that's what they're presenting to either investors or advisors, right? And it's like, hey, this is the opportunities. These are the opportunities that we have.
Yeah.
And now you're coming in and saying that we don't have those opportunities.
I mean, I preach all the time that a lot of founders say we have a broken pipeline, right? We're just not getting enough into the pipeline. And I think universally the bigger problem, quite frankly, is, as we dive into this next section, is win rates.
Yeah.
It's like, it's not the number of opportunities you have, is, are you having success winning the ones that you should win?
Yep.
Have you defined the opportunities you have a chance at winning? And what is your close ratio, your win ratio with those? Because at the end of the day, nothing else matters. If you're not closing deals at a higher rate, then you've got product market fit problems, a sales team problem, a training. There's a lot of factors, but that will tell you everything you need to know. Meaning, if you have a 10% close rate versus a 40% close rate, right? That's a big problem, right?
Yeah. Yep. Big problem on the 10%. Not a huge problem on the 40%.
Hey, way to put that out, Ron. Thanks. I didn't know people would get that. So with that, one of the things I want to talk to you about is, so now that you're doing consulting, you're helping founders out now. What is it that when you first start the engagement, that you really try to focus on, and what are the type of KPIs do you like to focus on, or let them at least understand that are really critical for their business?
Yeah, I think there's like two main things that I typically focus on. The first piece is lead flow, where leads are coming from and what good leads look like, and being able to get some sort of data on what good leads and bad leads look like. And then the second piece is the pipeline, looking at the pipeline and how it's structured in order to be able to effectively sell. What I mean by that is, does it match the buying process of your prospects? If there are two totally different processes going on, obviously there's going to be misalignment and no deals are going to happen. Or they will happen, but it will just take a long time and trying to figure out what's going on in that.
Do these founders that you work with typically have anyone in marketing, a marketing department, marketing person that helps with you in at least the lead sourcing? And
I'd say it's hit or miss. Some do, some don't. And it's always beneficial to have marketing, obviously, because leads are what drives sales. Yeah. So I'd say it's like 50-50. The ones that have it typically are more advanced.
So as you're creating this, you're evaluating the lead flow, where they're coming from, which ones are good, and then starting to create the pipeline. What tools have you typically used to help you build this process to make a more repeatable process? Because I'm assuming they're hand in hand. You're building the process. You still need some tools, not a ton, but you need some sort of structure to help you formalize everything, right?
I mean, CRM's key, right? Like having the CRM is going to be the big piece of that. But then understanding the outbound motion, or how leads are coming in. Like if there's an outbound motion, you're going to want something like a Zoom Info or an Apollo or clay or things like that that help you kind of sell from an outbound perspective and kind of put some structure around that. But I think more so like a lot of founders will get caught up in the tooling rather than
because they understand technology.
Yeah, they built it, right? Like their own product. But I think understanding what's going on behind it and then letting the understanding behind what you're doing lead you to a tool is a much better approach. I like to use as little tools as possible early on, just because you want your hands to be dirty.
Right.
You want to do as much as you can to figure that out.
And sometimes in the beginning, it's not so bad coming from spreadsheets, as long as it's on something digital that you can transfer over and so on and so forth into CRM. Talk about process now. Obviously, again, as a passionate entrepreneur, a founder, right? You probably have you have a process. It might be in your head, might be loosely based on something in their mind.
Yeah.
They might use something out of a box. For example, if they have CRM, they might just use straight up what the process is in the CRM. But what are some of the things that you do to start building that process from step to step?
Yeah, well, first off is like listen to as many calls that the founders had or founders have had with prospects. Go through those and figure out what coaching mechanisms or like how people are thinking about buying, so that you can kind of direct them down that path. Because a lot of the times there's not a lot of discovery going on. It's just conversations. It's like, hey, I want to talk about my product. I want to talk about this. I want to talk about that. When a lot of the times it should be turned on its head and let's talk about the prospect and figure out what they need and how you can go through it. So I think that's like number one. And then that process then kind of dictates what those stages would be. I actually tell founders all the time to make don't name them. Just call them like stage 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And
why is that?
Win loss. Just so that you can figure out what activities need to happen in each one. And then you actually learn how many different processes or how many different stages there should be. And then you can start to define them by exit and entrance criteria. And then the activities that are going on and like the milestones that are happening within each. And then you can build that up over time based on how they're buying.
Interesting. The discovery side of things you mentioned that they really don't do because they don't push back or maybe look for pain as much as they should in the beginning. I think that's the most critical part of the process.
I think so. Like from a selling standpoint, even very experienced enterprise AEs that I've hired over the years will sometimes struggle in the qualification process. And when you go back and you're coaching them with some of the calls later stage, you go back to, hey, that was a qualification issue. You didn't know that this person needed to be involved, and they just put a kibosh on your entire deal, right? Whereas like if you had known that early on, it's a lot easier for you to close that deal because you've created that plan along the way to include them.
So you're helping them formalize a process. So it's a repeatable process, not just for them, but for as you add salespeople.
Yep.
Which is great. But one thing that also is kind of the opposite of this is that entrepreneurs, founders sell a passion.
Yep.
And I always say, can you bottle that passion and give it to the sales organization? Because how you go to market really is empowering, right?
Yep.
It's exciting. People want to speak to founders and entrepreneurs because of the level of passion they bring, the knowledge they have about the industry, about their company, and all that stuff. So how do you take their knowledge and passion and as much as you can train the sales team?
Yeah.
They can't be the founder. They can't be, you know what I mean? But how can we bottle some of that?
Yeah, there's definitely ways to do it. And I think this is where like marketing comes in to help with the messaging and the positioning of the overall company as a whole. But instead of directing it at the product, which I think a lot of founders do naturally because they're really good at it, direct it at a story, like create a story that resonates with the market. And that you can then pass that story off, and then it's you're hiring an actor or an actress, right? Like they can become very excited about that story and tell that story many times over, and then that's that like structured process early on that allows you to kind of continue out, push out to other people.
Yeah, it's funny you say that. I mean, I think back to my days. think back to Live Person, and Rob Lacasio was the founder and the CEO of the company. And he was so good about starting off the story of like his first company started, how it led to Live Person, and the problem he's going to solve. And his thing was, I forget what kind of company he was calling a company, and he was on hold, and it's ringing, and he's on hold, and it's hearing the music, and he's like, there's got to be a better way for customer service. This is the time the internet is really starting to boom. And that's how he started Live Person. He personally had a horrible experience with customer support over and over again, and he wanted to speak to a live person in real time, and thus he started the chat. But that story of why he started it and the problem he was solving, and then that was easy to translate for the rest of my sales organization.
Totally.
And we told it even 2 years into the past the founding of the company, it still went back to that. And same thing when I went to Cheetah Mail, the story why the crazy name Cheetah Mail, like that was always the thing, like who names a company Cheetah Mail? But like now that you say it, it's like every startup I was at, when we really engaged our audience well, we told them the story, not just the company, but then why we're trying to tackle and solve this problem in the marketplace. And it was easy for salespeople to absorb because it was a story. It wasn't technical. It had nothing to do with about the product. It was more emotional.
And that's exactly it. Like the emotion component is people are drawn to the emotion, and you read a good book and you love it. You want to talk about it. You read a terrible book and you're like, oh shit, I just gave up halfway through. Right? Like, be the book that people want to talk about. And, think about that as a salesperson. You're telling a story. And, that story can be short, it can be long, depending on your audience. But I think that's the most powerful piece of being able to transition it from founder-led to AEs. Give them an easy way to tell a story.
I also think it's cool when founders record their story, whether it's at a type of presentation they did to a third party, or if they just record it for the company to post it on. I think it's always good to hear it from them directly as well.
And I think another piece of it as well is like the founder should say it to the company as often as they can. Like communicate that story out.
Everybody should
all
know.
the time. Like one thing James did awesome at AdZerk early on is like he told his story all the time. Right. And
all
it was easy for me to go out and tell that story because I heard it so many times, which was great. And that's probably still translating today.
You know what founders aren't good at? If you want a good deal, negotiate with a founder, right?
It's funny. Like all the founders, when I came in, I've told them to get out. Like once money starts being talked about.
Be the good guy, I'll be the bad guy. Let me take care of this. Let's increase our ARR.
But naturally that comes from passion though, right? Like they want to see people using the tool, and they want to see people finding success with it. And they don't want any barriers to get in the way of that. Even if you can get more money for it, they're naturally just going to want people in it.
And everybody wants to negotiate with, at the end of the day, the decision maker, right?
Exactly.
Everyone has a boss, so does a founder, but if you can get to them, I'd want to do the same thing.
Totally.
I'd always want access to that. And that's funny. We were talking about this briefly before of like, when you close a big deal, down the road, the founder maybe was involved, comes back for renewal. Who's the last person you want renewing that deal, right?
Likely not the founder. But you want them involved from a servicing standpoint and like being the face of the company in different aspects. So
for sure,
like there's that fine line that you got to balance.
You just got to step out of the, hey, I'm going to let my team do their thing, and I'm going to do my thing. I'm happy to support, and I'm in the loop, but
well, that's when you find leaders, and like their transition from a founder to a leader.
Delegating.
It's a big part of it.
KPIs. Curious, when you work with founders today, they're typically pretty data driven, right? That's not the problem, but sales is a different beast altogether. What are the KPIs you kind of give them guidance on that they should really follow?
I usually what I do is I'll give them like a target, right? Like, hey, we're trying to get to these metrics, because a lot of the times I'll get in, it's usually pretty early on, and they don't know the different things to look at, but they also don't know what they're striving for. either. So like if I think about a KPI right now for an early stage company,
Yeah.
the first thing I would think about, you already mentioned it, conversion rates. Like those are so key, and being able to lock those in at each stage in the pipeline, not just what the overall close rate is, right? So I think working towards that is key.
Right.
And a lot of founders may not even know how to get there. And
Get there what?
Like get to what our close rate is.
Okay.
Right. Like, do we start it when it's an active deal and they're in an engagement?
They don't know when to start tracking it.
Yeah. Okay. Right. So like at what stage do you do that? Are they in an active evaluation?
You do it when it's at 90%, Ron.
Yeah.
Everybody knows that.
Well, yeah. I mean, yes.
I think early days, conversion rate is tough if you didn't win any or if you only got a handful of deals to really understand what success looks like. To me, I care about meetings.
I was just about, that was going to be my next KPI.
It's, gosh, if you don't have meetings, and to me, meetings are also the leading indicator of slowdown in net new opportunities, slowdown in close. Next quarter is going to be tough. Like I've always just relied on the number one metric for me, regardless if it's a startup or not, is like how many times we getting in face with people and tracking the different types of meetings, not just a meeting is meeting. There's different value associated with different meetings.
Yeah, that was going to be the next one, is that you have to track activity,
right?
Whether that be outbound that turns into or like networking, I don't care what it is, you have to track how many people you've talked to and figure out how those turn into actual leads. And because then you can start working.
You bring up a good point, which is talking to. Like a meeting is not, I'm slacking back and forth, it's more I'm texting back and forth. It's phone, video, whatever it is. And it's funny, now that we're in Sales HQ, I can see when people are having a busy day and not having a busy day just by the number of phone calls and hearing people on the phone. And that's kind of what we miss when we're not in an office anymore, is that just real time being able to check if folks are busy with the right activities, right? And it's not about the number of emails and the number of other types of messages you send. It's the number of meaningful conversations that you're having, right?
You go back to the early days of cold calling. It's like you were judged by the number of dials that you had. I remember that. But then I look back at it and I was like, well, I had 5 conversations today.
Right.
You only made 30 dials. I was like, I had 5 conversations. That was awesome. 5
conversations turned into 2 opportunities, or wherever the number is. Those 2 opportunities converted out of 50% close rate. Like it's sales is easy if you just focus on the right things and not busy, nonsense metrics, right?
Like focus in and like track very little early on. But meaningful very little, right? And then kind of span it out from there.
One last thing about working with early stage companies and founders. In addition to like the lead flow, to the opportunity funnel, to the process, what's another kind of area you're consistently advising or coaching them on?
Coaching, like the types of calls and like the types of conversations that they're having. I would say like discovery call frameworks, demo call frameworks, and like how to put a process around what activities need to be in the overall sales process. For some that may only be like 2 conversations. Others, it could be, you got to put together a discovery call framework because you need certain information to get to the demo. And then from the demo, you need to get to the putting together a project plan or a mutual action plan. And then from there, you got to go to a full-on proposal and present the proposal. And then you got to work through procurement and all that stuff. So it just depends
all
on
the way through the process. You're trying to button it up, basically.
Yeah, exactly. And like looking at where the friction points are, right? Like for some, it could be pricing. It's like, we're having a really hard time conveying our value when we give out pricing. It's like, all right, well, maybe pricing is a little off. Or you just
not resonating.
Or you just need to make it easier to understand.
That's for sure. Before we wrap up, I wanted to see if there was any questions from the audience. Yes, Linda.
Very interesting stuff. And given that you started where you had to figure out everything, right? That was a bigger company, right? Just
Well, yeah, the overall deals were, yes, they were big, but we didn't know the actual size. That was the hard part. The pharmaceutical component is like, they said, yes, that we're going to put this into the drawings, but we don't know the actual outcome yet.
I want to tie that into the thing you said about not naming the stages.
Yep.
Just numbering them.
Yep.
That, and the vision that I got was like of an accordion.
Yeah.
That when it's a smaller organization, one person will wear a lot of hats.
Yep.
But as it gets bigger and there are more subs, 2.1, 2.3, you've been at the beginning and you've been with eye contact. Is there a point where that accordion just doesn't work anymore? Like you have to completely create new steps?
But I think, yes, I do think there's a point where it breaks down and you probably have to readjust what you're doing. There's always going to be stages. But I think the big thing that I've seen is that depends on if you are selling to new types of customers, right? Like if you're selling to the same people all the time and it's all small businesses, it's probably going to work for a very long time. But once you adjust to, hey, we're going to be enterprise now, it's probably a new team and it's probably new processes and potentially a new pipeline. So that's where I would say it would break down, but it would just be more of an adjustment.
So you're saying really it's the thing that's really going to dramatically change your process is the ICP you're going after, meaning SMB versus enterprise or enterprise versus mid-market and so on and so forth.
And usually you start to see that with different companies as they scale, right? Is they get a mid-market team and they have a small business team and they have their enterprise team and they're all going after different
direct
targets.
team versus a partner team and all that.
Yeah, and most of those have different pipeline. Most of those teams have different pipelines.
And different motions. And all
yeah, exactly.
I'm going to ask you one last question. I'm going to put you on the spot.
Oh, so I love it.
You better really have a good response because it's
All
make or break time, Ron.
Right, cool. I love it.
But I know you were in a sport where there was a lot of pressure. So question for you is, what is one thing about Ron that's interesting that most people don't know?
Interesting that most people don't know. It is a really good question.
I know.
And
I ask it all the time. I know something interesting about Ron, but I can't share.
Yeah, I think probably the most interesting fact about me that not a ton of people know is having a heart attack in like my early 30s. Not a ton of people know it. I don't like broadcast.
Brag about it?
Yeah, no, I don't
You have
brag
a shirt
about it.
that says?
No, very scary situation, but it's also very interesting because I got to go to heart rehab with people that were at least double my age at the time. So
Wake up call, no?
very, very good wake up call. And I think probably one of the main factors of me wanting to plan a path out on my own because I want to spend more time with my kids and my wife and hang out with the family.
I know one other interesting thing about it.
Now I want to hear it. Yeah.
You're the Sandman. You're the closer, man.
Oh, I was the
baseball.
I was a closer in baseball.
I mean, talk about a good transition from to go into sales, right? And you even said it in the first company you worked for. You wanted to close. It was in your DNA.
Yeah. Well, that I did do that in college. I was our closer. I think I'm still in some record books.
Nice.
You got to dust them off, I think. But
you and Larry Long in the record books for baseball. Nice.
Yeah. So, and like another part with that is I was able to play at Fenway as a part of that whole process.
So now, next time someone asks you, in addition to,
I was gonna say that, but like I feel like I talk about that way more than I talk about.
That's been on other podcasts. We got the.
I was trying to go really
exclusive
down.
here on.
You got the
Live
exclusive.
from Sales HQ.
Yeah.
Well, Ron, thanks for coming on, man.
Yeah, I
really
appreciate
the conversation.
Yeah, for
Good
sure.
times.
Thank you.
Till next time, Sales HQ.